Why are we risk averse? Why do we extrapolate pessimism much easier than optimism? And what do we do when we're on a crossroads where one side is supposedly safe and the other supposedly unsafe, but the unsafe side has a lot more upside? This is a Not Even Wrong podcast. It's May 15, 2021. This is Krim Delko. Since the last update on May 12th, we are up 1.4%. The market's up 2.8%. For the year, we are down 18.8%. The market's up 10.5%. We're underperforming by 29%. This is the largest underperformance we've had so far. In absolute terms, we're a little bit below our worst case scenario. I think last week was a clear indication of front running against arkhamvest and in general bad news about the fund and people selling the fund. We've seen, for example, on Thursday, we were down while the market was up, and it was all driven by arkhamvest type stocks. And then on Friday, we had a large rebound again on a strong market, though, but there's clearly liquidation going on. We don't know if it's related to the actually liquidating hedge fund who has been supposedly, according to Cathy Wood, invested in arkhamvest back in the day. But there is some front running going on, or some liquidation, or both. And therefore, the good news is that we don't see any fundamental problems with particularly Tesla or our CRISPR stocks. The bad news is, of course, we don't know how long this liquidation will go. But given our massive underperformance, we believe that we are pretty close to the bottom here. Now let's talk about the topic of today, which is it's kind of three things in one. So the question is, you're at a crossroads in your life. Let's say typical situation, you have a certain, let's say you just finished college and you can go and let's say do an internship with a company or do something that everybody else is doing, or you can do something a lot more risky. Let's say you can go and ask people for what you want. Let's say you want to do something very specific, something that only you want to do, and that maybe the marketplace has it, but it's very difficult to obtain, or you just don't fit the mold. You're not the typical person that would do that. Let's say, I'm just throwing this out, you just finish your engineering degree and you go and you want to work at the launch side of SpaceX, which is a very coveted job. And that's what you want to do. You want to launch rockets. That's your goal in life. And you don't want to go do an internship at Honeywell or Boeing or something and then wait 5 years to hopefully ever get to the launch business, and then maybe at some point be at a launch side when you're 20 years into your career. You want to do it now. So the question is, which path do you go? I think this also begets the question of risk averseness versus risk taking. I think this goes back to 0 to 1, Peter Thiel. This is covered in that book pretty well, because Peter Thiel's argument is that people who are entrepreneurs, people, wealth creators, always will take the risky path. They would always do what they think they need to do, what they think is the right thing for them to do, regardless of what the marketplace offers them, because they need to execute against their own criteria, not against what the market offers them. So this is the situation. I can throw in another example. You are, let's say, a young aspiring soccer player, and your team, your local team, just doesn't have the quality that you're looking for. And now what do? You go and try to play with very high-end teams, maybe outside of your state or just far away. But of course, those teams will maybe evaluate you based on certain criteria that you don't even have, because you have been playing in the mediocre team. So how can you even match their standards? And but you yourself, you have your standards and you know where you want to go. So what do? Do you keep playing in your mediocre team, hope that one day something will change? Or do you change something drastically? Maybe you don't play for a while and just train. Maybe you train something a little different, or maybe you take a hiatus, or you just move somewhere and start from scratch. So those are the kinds of questions I want to discuss today. I want to tie them to the question of risk-taking and risk aversion. So let's start with the example. You are an aspiring athlete. Your local team is mediocre. You can't play anywhere locally that is up to your standards of where you want to go. Let's say you want to be a professional player. You want to be the best in the world at what you do. But locally, you just don't have that kind of resources, the teams, the coaches. the attitude, which is very important. The attitude towards your sport is just such that, oh, we're not taking this very seriously. This is for fun. This is for recreation. I think football comes to mind. Let's say in Texas, high school football is the most serious thing in the state. It certainly isn't very serious in places like, let's say, San Francisco, where I live. And I mean, I can name a lot of other, hockey in Minnesota probably is a very serious thing. Hockey elsewhere is less serious. But in general, you will have that problem. And now the question is, how do you, as a person, react to this situation? You have two options. You have three options. You can always quit, but let's put that option out. So you can pursue the path that the local market gives you, so you can play for mediocre teams in mediocre coaching environments, and then hope that somehow you can surface to the top. Of course, you can do that. This is not the Einsteinian craziness in the sense that you're not doing the same thing hoping something else comes out, because you can, let's say, play in mediocre teams, but just train outside of the team, do your own training, and just continuously improve. It is possible. Or you make a radical shift. Let's say, if you want to stay locally, you just don't play with those mediocre teams. You do something else. For example, you train on your own. You do very specific training, and then you go to other places where there is the culture that you're looking for, and you just go as a sort of undrafted, unsigned agent, or whatever the term is in your sport, and you try to get into those teams with your unique approach, your unique knowledge that you've acquired by definition now, because you've detached yourself from the mediocrity. Because there is an oxymoron here, that is, if you're in a mediocre team and you just, and you even feel it yourself, and then you go, let's say, to a top team, they will immediately sense that mediocrity in your play, because you've played in a mediocre team. I mean, you can't just grow outside of your own environment. It's incredibly difficult. Of course, there are people that can do that, and those are there are always gifted geniuses, and the Michelangelos and the Michael Jordans of this world. But assuming you're not that kind of person, you're just a very driven, aspiring person. You don't have that luxury to fall back on your natural born talent. You just have to do something else, on that front. So to come back to the question now, what do you do? And I think this is where the risk-taking versus risk aversion culture comes in place. The risk taker will, of course, go with the path. Okay, I'm going to take the risk here. This is 0 to 1. I think this is the key message of 0 to 1. You need uniqueness. You need people that are willing to take an enormous risk, to take a step outside of the beaten path, and really go with a risky path. And I think what Thiel says in his book is two things. He says only people who take that non-beaten path, who actually take, in my example, who would not play with the mediocre team and actually do something else, only those people have a chance for greatness. And second, he also says that most people, unfortunately, choose the other path, which he calls the rat race. He explains it with his own experience of getting a degree in Stanford and then going to be in a law firm. And he says, everybody fights to get in, and once they're in, they want to get out, versus it should be the other way around, that it's very easy to get in, and once you're in, you never want to get out. So this is sort of the lay of the land of this episode. And now I want to discuss a little bit why are people, if you think about this from an evolutionary perspective, let's say we're rational human beings, we want the best for ourselves, we want absolute excellence, let's say we want that. And why would we not choose the risky path if the upside is so great, versus the beaten path, which we know is most likely not going to yield any results? Nevertheless, most people, I think, out of 100 people, you will find probably 95 people choosing the beaten path, the path that, like, again, is the mediocrity, the place where you're unhappy, the law firm that Peter Thiel talks about that you want to get out of desperately, that is not your passion. Or in my athlete example, you want to play for this mediocre team on the mediocre coaching with mediocre players, and still be frustrated because you just don't see you for some reason you're not going to choose that other path, which is the very risky path. It's a path that has a void in front of you. It's the path that in surfing terms, you're taking that big wave. You don't know how it's going to end, but if you can ride it, it's going to be the wave of your life. This is the kind of path that the risk takers, the 0 to 1 type people take. And I would say few of them take it. And the question why, I think, comes to two things. Number one, I think it's easier for us humans to extrapolate pessimism versus optimism. This is a conjecture. I can't prove it. I can't prove it neurologically or psychologically, but it's just anecdotal. If I ask 1,000 people, they would be very easy. It would be very easy for them to extrapolate pessimism. It's very, very difficult to extrapolate optimism. And I think Naval and Brad Hall in their conversations have one argument here, which is the argument of evolution and the loss aversion, or more precisely, the bankruptcy aversion, or the failure aversion, or the death aversion. So what they're saying is that we have this huge aversion because there is the point in life where it can end. For example, if you have a company and you take too much risk and you go bankrupt, well, if you go bankrupt, it's over. So you cannot take that risk. This is a non-linear event. If you hunt and the tiger attacks you and eats you, you're dead. So every risk or every potentiality or every probability that your outcomes could be better are irrelevant if you die. So meaning we cannot allow for death. We cannot allow for bankruptcy. Also, Ben Horowitz talks about this in his talks about entrepreneurs. You can take as much risk as you want, but cash flow is king. If you run out of cash at the wrong time, or pretty much any time, as a small company, you're dead. You can't survive, because if you're at the mercy of the market, if you're at the mercy of other people deciding your fate, then you're dead. I mean, nobody's there for charity. So you always need to make sure that you can survive. And that's why we are hardwired to extrapolate pessimism better than optimism. Now, having said that, the question is now, why are there even people who do extrapolate optimism? And there's two types of people. There's the ones who don't have a choice. Again, this is from a book I can't remember. Somebody wrote this way back, who said that entrepreneurs are not risk takers because most of them come with nothing, have nothing to lose, and therefore also don't take a lot of risk because they have nothing to lose. They are already at a very low level. If they, let's say, declare bankruptcy or something like that, who cares? I mean, they came, let's say, typical entrepreneur in Silicon Valley would be an immigrant from China or India with nothing. And so what if they go bankrupt a few times? Because if they make it, it's a big deal. This would explain also why immigrants are so successful. It's not because they are genetically self-selected, stronger or anything. They just have less to lose than others because they've already probably made a huge decision back in when they left, and when they left their hometown, they probably had some big problems there. So their loss aversion is much less. So this would explain that situation also. So there's that argument, and then there's the other argument, and I think I personally I buy into that there are just people that have it's a bit like in science or sports. There is a certain talent that you have, and instinctively you have that talent. Let's say you have the talent to become a world-class athlete or a world-class artist. You have that talent, and it's nagging you. You know it's in there, but you can't rationalize it because you're so different than your environment. Like I said in my athlete example, your environment is so mediocre that they can't recognize your talent. You can't calibrate yourself with your environment. You're a renegade. You're an outsider, but you yourself know you can get to world class. You can get to that world class. You just have to. You have to keep doing what you're doing, and if you can't do it locally, like I said, you might have to choose unbeaten paths, on unique ways, unique vectors to get there, and then you succeed. I think this would explain, let's say, why, let's say, a lot of artists end up in New York City or places like that, where they are in their hometowns looked upon as crazy, and then they come to the place where the culture and the risk taking and all that stuff is actually being rewarded, and then all of a sudden they blossom, they bloom. Same thing with the athlete. He could be in San Francisco trying to be a soccer player. This town just doesn't have the culture for that, and then next thing you know, you go to another town and there the culture is very different, and you become a very successful player. Not just because you're good already. You were good also in let's say San Francisco, but the culture starts carrying you. It's kind of like you get that uplift through the culture. People start recognizing your drive. People start appreciating your dedication, versus in the town where you're from, where mediocrity is much more nourished. You are looked upon as a threat, and people don't like you, etc. I think the same applies to, let's say, students that go from a place, let's say, that is again mediocre, and then they come to a place like Stanford or MIT, and there you go, they become very successful entrepreneurs or scientists. So to summarize, in this episode, I asked the question of risk takers versus non-risk takers. I ask a specific question of when you're in a path in life that puts you in a position where you keep on with mediocrity, although you know that it's not the right path, versus taking a big leap into the void, but trying to pursue something that you know you're good at, but for some reason you're not able to express that. How do we act in situations like that? And I concluded that most of the time in situations like that, most people go towards the mediocrity path. They don't take the risk, but very few people take the risk, and this is what 0 to 1 says. Those are the wealth creators. And I then spoke about why that is the case. Why do most people choose the mediocre path, even though maybe it nags them and they could do the other thing? And I said that it is just easier for us to extrapolate pessimism versus optimism. I then said that is a kind of evolutionary explainable, because we just have this huge aversion against absolute loss or bankruptcy or failure at large scale. So we have this loss aversion, and then there are still people who don't have it, and the reason they don't have it is either because they have nothing to lose, or they are just the kinds of people, the few that they have that ability, like they just have it in a sense. That's what we call the genius, or that's what we call the extraordinary person. In hindsight, of course, it's those people who just have it and they don't even know it, but they have to do it, and they keep doing it, and they find a way to do it, and then they end up in a place at some point, the magnet that is attractive to such people. Again, I mentioned, let's say, the artist who gets attracted to New York City because that's where that culture is being nurtured, or the athlete who ends up in a place where his athleticism and devotion is being nurtured, or the scientist or entrepreneur who ends up in Silicon Valley. And this is also why we have these clusters around the world where excellence is being driven in certain fields. Now, to finalize this episode, of course, let me just arc this also to the hedge fund business. I think I speak for myself here. This was exactly the kind of situation that I was in when I started Orange Capital Partners with my partner Zovinar. The beaten path was to work on Wall Street, maybe on Wall Street to try to end up on a prop desk, which we both did. So use the bank's capital to make money, but even that was slightly less mediocre than the rest of Wall Street. And then there was only one way to really excel at what we do, which is to go on our own, take the capital that we have, and just take the risk, and take that risk of complete bankruptcy, because that when you're on your own as a hedge fund, you absolutely have that risk. And we did it, and so far so good. We have 19.7 cumulative average annual return as of the first quarter of 2021 since inception in March 2008, which is an exceptional return. Orange Capital Partners has been a great success for us personally, financially, and also intellectually. And I can only recommend this to anybody who is listening here. And the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund. The most important question is the first question when you start: am I going to take that risk into the void or not? Because you cannot become a successful hedge fund manager without taking that risk into the void. Thank you.